They say rent in New Jersey is a nightmare, and I thought I was lucky when I found that guest house. Now I know better. Moving from Philly to a quiet town in northern Jersey was supposed to be a fresh start. The guest house was advertised as cozy, which was landlord speak for small, but $900 a month with utilities included sounded like a miracle. The landlord, Mrs. Cartwright, was this tiny, wrinkled woman who seemed harmless enough, even if she gave off weird vibes. She insisted on cash for the deposit, gave me a lease that looked like it had been written on a typewriter, and didn't ask very many questions. At the time, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. I was unpacking on my first day there when I heard it. One clear, deliberate footstep right above me. I froze mid-slice on a box of kitchen utensils. The box cutter slipped, and suddenly blood was pouring from a gash on my palm. Cursing, I grabbed a towel to wrap my hand, but my eyes stayed glued on the ceiling above me. My new place was a small guest house, just one level, and there shouldn't have been anything above me. But for the time being, I was able to shake it off and distract myself with unpacking. Over the next few days, the place started feeling really off. I couldn't really put it into words, but it just felt heavy in my chest to be there. I tried to focus on feeling more settled in. Mrs. Cartwright hadn't opened my text that I sent her about trash pickup, so I went and knocked on the door. Her house sat about 50 feet from the guest house I was renting. It looked perfectly normal, with curtains drawn, a few flower pots on the porch. But she didn't answer. I glanced around to her driveway, and her car was there, so I would assume that she was home. But after knocking a few more times, I gave up. Maybe she was taking a nap. A short while later, I realized that she hadn't yet cashed my first rent check. At first, I didn't care. Free rent, who would complain? But the more I thought about it, it just felt weirder and weirder. Who wouldn't cash a rent check, especially from a brand new tenant? I sent her another text, just to make sure it would be delivered. But she never replied. One afternoon, I was unpacking the last few boxes in my bedroom when I noticed something odd. Inside the closet, nestled against the ceiling, was a small square door with a pull-string latch. It was barely noticeable, blending in perfectly with the peeling paint. And when I saw it, my stomach sank. I told myself it was just an attic access door, nothing unusual, but I still thought back to what I heard on that first night. I grabbed a chair, stood on top of it, and pulled the string. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dusty crawl space above the ceiling. The attic was cramped and stale. I found a single light bulb dangling from the rafters and tugged it on. The space wasn't big enough for someone to stand in, but it was big enough to store things. And there were things. A porcelain doll sat at the edge of a beam, staring at me with its dark eyes. Nearby, a pair of tiny, worn-out shoes looked like they belonged to a child in the 1950s. A stack of books, with their covers rotting away, leaned against the far wall. It didn't look like anyone had touched the stuff in decades. I climbed down, shut the door, and tried to forget about it. But deep down, I felt like I had just disturbed something that didn't want to be disturbed. The noises started again a few nights later. It was past midnight when I heard it, a faint thumping noise, followed by the sounds of shuffling I flipped on the light and stared at the closet, and after I finally found the nerve, I tiptoed over and silently opened my closet door. I looked up and my chest tightened. The attic door was open, just a crack, but that was enough to send my pulse racing. I was sure that I closed it behind me. I am absolutely certain of it. I grabbed my toolkit and nailed the closet door shut. The next day, I bought a heavy-duty lock for both the front door and the closet door. I told myself I was just being paranoid, trying to comfort myself, I guess. But deep down, I knew better. I knew I wasn't alone in that house. A few nights later, I had tried to push the whole thing out of my mind, mostly successfully. I met a young woman named Emily at a brewery, and we really hit it off. She laughed at all my stupid jokes. She also loved horror movies, and she wasn't put off when I told her about the small guest house that I rented. So when I suggested heading back to my place, she agreed. The night was going great. Wine and music and easy conversation. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Eventually, we started getting handsy, and we were making out. I think we had both started to undress a little bit when she suddenly shoved me away. She was pale, staring past me toward the hallway. Is this some kind of a joke? I frowned. What are you talking about? It's bad enough you didn't tell me you have a roommate, she snapped. But the fact that you don't even care that he was standing there watching us is sick. I turned so fast I nearly knocked over the wine bottle. But the hallway was empty. What roommate? I said, my voice cracking. Emily was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. I'm not blind or stupid. I saw him standing over there by the closet. My blood ran cold. Emily, I don't have a roommate. Her face hardened. Don't. Just stop. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving me standing there, staring at the locked closet door. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself Emily had just been seeing things, that maybe the wine or the dim lighting had messed with her perception. But I knew better. It was around 2 a.m. when the thumping noises started up again. It sounded like faint footsteps overhead, and then they grew louder, heavier, until it sounded like someone was stomping directly above me. The sounds moved across the ceiling back and forth like it was pacing angrily. My heart pounded in my chest, and I reached for my baseball bat that I kept around for security. Then it stopped, and for a moment, the silence was worse than the noises. And then, there were 3 sharp, deliberate knocks on the front door. I froze, and the knocks came again, louder this time. Bang, bang, bang. I couldn't move. I just stood there, clutching the bat, staring at the front door. I stayed awake until sunrise, waiting for something else to happen. But the house was quiet. The next morning, I packed up my things. I didn't care about the lease, or Mrs. Cartwright, or whatever the hell was in that attic, or outside that door. I was done. Mrs. Cartwright's car was still in her driveway when I left. I didn't bother knocking on her door. I didn't leave a note. I didn't care. Because she never cashed my rent check. I stopped payment on it as soon as I got to my bank. Now I'm crashing on my best friend's couch, writing this to warn anybody else who might think they found a deal on a guest house in New Jersey. My mom was watching Jessie, our newborn, and my wife and I were on our way to see a house we hoped to rent. Molly was relocating for work, and we didn't have much time to put things in order. I was excited for the change, though a bit hesitant to pack up our lives and move so quickly. The house was brick and fairly nondescript. There were neighbors a couple hundred yards away on each side, close enough to feel suburban, but far enough to feel like everyone has their own space. Molly pulled up and parked along the curb, even though the driveway was clear. We got out of the car, and as we walked toward the house, a tall man with shaggy white hair came out, shielding the sun from his eyes. He was quiet and weak, and his name, he said, was Mr. Hart. He was a little weird, but nice enough that we brushed it off. He took us around the house, and it was suitable for what we needed, but never something I would have picked out if we had the choice. As we finished the tour, Mr. Hart offered to give us a few minutes alone. Molly had that look in her eyes where I knew her mind was already made. She insisted we should apply. If the approval came back through in a week, we'd be able to move in right after, and she'd only have to commute from our old place for a few days. It did make sense. I agreed and sat in the car while they talked details. When Molly came back, she was beaming. "We're already approved," she said. "He just wants to get rid of the place. He used to live here with his wife, and when she died, he couldn't stay without her. So sad. He hates showing the place. He was practically convincing me we should take it. I already cut him a check." I felt this was kind of odd, but I didn't want to rain on the parade. We were free to move in as early as the next day, and would take care of the paperwork later. When we arrived in our truck, the house key was waiting for us under the mat. A few days passed, and we'd gotten everything in. It was my first time being alone in the house with the baby, with Molly at work. The laundry was in the basement, and while the baby napped upstairs, I went down to put a load in. The stairs came down in the middle of the basement, and then you had to take a sharp turn and walk all the way towards the back to get to the washer and dryer. Above them was this large fluorescent light, encased in a red plastic shield and a metal grate. It basically looked like an emergency light. I turned it on, and it emitted a deep, monstrous hum. Every corner of the basement illuminated in a ghastly, blood-red glow. I couldn't imagine what it was used for, but I certainly didn't need it. I quickly turned it back off and threw the laundry in. As I got to the top of the stairs, I heard a click, followed once again by a deep, familiar hum. I turned around, and sure enough, the basement was once again glowing red. I took a breath and took the first step, then the next. I probably didn't turn the switch back off all the way, and the vibrations of the laundry pushed the light back on. This logical thought gave me the confidence I needed to round the corner and return to the back of the basement, where I flipped the light back off once again. The humming stopped, and I stood in the quiet glow of a single light bulb at the foot of the stairs. I looked again to the red light and saw it had its own plug. I followed the cord and yanked it from the outlet. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard the hum again. Pins and needles ran through my entire body. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and turned around. The basement was glowing red. I took one step down. What was I going to do? I took the next. The humming grew louder. I reached the bottom of the staircase and turned towards the light. Just as I confirmed with my eyes that it was still unplugged, it snapped, flickered, and turned off. I stood there for a moment, listening to my own breath. And then, the light came on again. I stepped towards it, and it clicked off. I waited and took another step. It clicked on again. I kept moving across the basement, and the flickering grew faster and faster, the humming louder and louder. The strobing made it almost impossible to see, and the violent vibrations of the humming caused my head to throb. I reached for the grating when every light in the basement went out at once. I ran as quickly as I could, smashing into old boxes and furniture as I made my way by the dim light bleeding down the stairs. I climbed up on all fours and slammed the door behind me, trying to catch my breath. I heard the baby crying in his bedroom. When Molly got home, I could tell that she didn't believe me, even though she saw how upset I was. She went downstairs alone to replace the bulb that had blown out. The red light wouldn't work for her, even after plugging it back in and flipping the switch. Still, she removed the grate and took it down at my request. A few days later, I'd almost forgotten about what had happened. I got a little nervous doing laundry, but with the red light off the wall, I was able to convince myself that Molly was right. We were safe. Jesse was once again down for his afternoon nap, and Molly was working. I was watching daytime TV and unpacking boxes when there was a sudden loud knock on the door. I turned the TV off and wiped my hands, getting quickly to the door, but there was nobody there. I hadn't seen any kids around the neighborhood, but I don't know. I guess I assumed it must have been a joke. I shut the door and went back to the boxes. I was busy and stressed. It was kinda easy to just put it behind me. But then, a little while later, it happened again. I rushed to the door without missing a beat, but once again, there was no one there. I stepped out onto the front porch and took a long look in each direction. No one. I went back inside and decided to check on the baby. He was gurgling in the crib, so I picked him up and walked around with him for a bit before I sat down with him in the rocking chair. Before I knew it, we had both dozed off. Then came another knock, and it was loud. But I was upstairs, far from the front door. How could it have been? My heart sank as I realized the sound hadn't come from the front door. The knock had come from the bedroom door that I didn't remember closing. "Molly?" I asked. Nothing. My heart was throbbing and my mouth was dry. I gently put the baby back in his crib and took a cautious step toward the door. "Molly?" Suddenly came the loudest, most violent beating against the door. I screamed and rushed to press the lock. Falling to my knees, I looked through the crack under the door into the hallway. But there was no one there. I stayed locked in that room with Jesse until Molly got home. I was too scared to do anything else. Molly suggested having my mother come stay for a few days, but I knew I was ready to leave. She wouldn't hear it. "It's just the sounds of an old house settling," she said. "You'll get used to it." As always, she was able to calm me down. I planned to start spending our days away from the house, running errands or visiting the park. The less time in the house without Molly, the better. But not long after that, we were watching a movie on the couch when we were both startled by a large thud directly above us, like something heavy had hit the floor hard. This was Jesse's room. Without saying a word, we bolted up the stairs. We could hear the baby shrieking. As we opened the door, I expected Jesse's crying to get louder, but it remained muffled. The bright moonlight came through the windows, and the heavy antique curtains had been torn down, left in a tall heap on the floor. The crying was coming from inside the curtains. We threw everything aside, digging towards the sound before Molly pulled Jesse from the curtains. Thank God he wasn't hurt, but it was enough of a scare. Molly finally agreed. She'd call Mr. Hart tomorrow and discuss our options. The three of us slept together in one room that night, with all the lights on. The next day, Molly was busy trying to reach Mr. Hart and sort out missing a few days of work, while I repacked the boxes that I had unloaded. The baby never left my sight. Of course, we cared about the money we'd be losing, but it was more important for us to feel safe. I found myself terrified to do anything in that house. We'd gotten a moving truck, and Molly planned to stay at a hotel while Jesse and I went back home to my mother's for a bit. Anything was better than that house. Jesse needed his teething ring, which we'd left upstairs. I didn't want to go upstairs alone, but I couldn't pull Molly from the phone, and it would only take a second. I grabbed a box of Jesse's things and stepped towards the door, but tripped and fell hard, spilling baby clothes onto the large throw rug that covered the original floors. A few of the rooms had rugs like these when we moved in. Somehow, the rug had gotten bunched up. As I bent over to fix it, I instead decided to pull it up, walking backwards towards the center of the room. In the middle of the floor was a large, deep brown stain covering the floorboards, exactly where we'd found Jesse the night before. I dropped the carpet and ran down the stairs to get Molly. But she didn't acknowledge me. She was staring at something, confused. After a few moments, she turned to me and handed me a check. The check she'd written for Mr. Hart on the day we met. It had never been cashed. It had never left the house. Standing in the sun by the truck, I felt a massive sense of relief knowing I'd never have to go inside again. As we loaded up the last of our things, a neighbor we hadn't met yet made his way down the street towards us. Never got the chance to come introduce myself, and you're already heading out. I know, I'm sorry, I said. We've had a last-minute change of plans. I was honestly surprised to see anyone come into the place being forward with you, he said. I asked him to elaborate. His wife, she was old and sick, bedridden, but she hated relying on him for everything. She wanted to open the curtains and let some light in, but she couldn't reach him on her own. She pulled over a stool and stretched for the corner when her husband knocked on the door. It scared her so bad they say she fell face first toward the floor, smashed her whole face in. The worst part? Her husband somehow didn't hear a thing, so he assumed she was asleep, and he went back downstairs and made dinner while she bled out on the floor. Do you know which room that was? I asked. She had the room upstairs in the front of the house. His eyes lifted to the windows of the room that until today had belonged to my infant son. I felt sick. Thanks for telling me, I said. That poor old man. It's so terrible. I just wish he had mentioned all that to us when we met him. The neighbor looked back at me like I had lost my mind. You couldn't have met him, he said. The night he found her, he hanged himself in the same room. Mr. Hart has been dead for months.